This is the earliest colour film in the collection and shows a garden party at the Tellwright's house in Hanford near Stoke-on-Trent. It's a fine day and you can glimpse a game of tennis in the background. The level tennis court is out of sight in this garden on the hill. This is Mrs. Young, wife of Eric Young, who was president of the North Staffordshire Infirmary. The house later became the vicarage to St Matthias Church and is now a residential care home. And here is the surgeon Mr. Young himself. The Youngs lived at Stoneyfields in Basford, and their own tennis courts would later become the site of the new Victoria Theatre, the house still standing. The film is a valuable record of fashions at the time. By the mid-30s, an annual event in Hanley Park was the Carnival of the Queens. Here, carnival queens from the city and surrounding areas paraded with their retinues.
That's me, all right. I was the Silverdale Queen at that time. The Carnival Day in Hanley Park was very special because, of course, all the local queens were there with our retinue, and crowds of people turned up to see this, all these queens, and we felt quite important, really, and at the same time somewhat self-conscious to be parading in this large ground. After the ceremony of Queens, we had tea. All of us were given tea with our retinues, and various people came up to talk to us. It was quite a long day, actually, and sometimes, I think at times it could be a bit cold because we were wearing thin silk dresses, you know, long silk dresses, as you can see by the film. And my dress was made by a local lady. It took her ages to make it. Every stitch was done by hand. It was cream silk. It was a full-length one. It was the first full-length dress that I'd ever had. It was long before I had an evening dress, and this was all done so beautifully. And I had about 10 fittings. She was meticulous, the way she fitted it. It was so beautifully done. I wish we had kept it. And my parents, of course, were very proud of the occasion. I had the crown. We had a very nice crown on, and a velvet robe trimmed with what seemed to be ermine, but it was a sort of soft, feathery feather down, swan down actually, but it looked very, very nice. And I had a team, as you've seen, of lovely maids of honour who were all very nice, and their parents came along. It was a most impressive occasion. Of course, we were there on 2 occasions, once when we were the Queen, and then once when we were the retiring Queen. I was really the Royal Infirmary Queen at Silverdale, and my job was to raise money for the North Staffordshire Royal Infirmary. And my good friend, in later life, the Morris family, they chose the Queen. Mrs. Morris helped to choose the Queen, and then my job was to raise money for that. And of course this was quite difficult in those times. It wasn't easy to raise money, but I had a mint patch in my parents' garden, and on Saturday mornings my team of schoolfellows gathered mint and we sold it to help raise my funds. Also, we made toffee and we sold that, and we had concerts, impromptu concerts, and we raised money that way. And I think altogether I raised about £20, which was a very considerable sum of money, and this went to the North Staffordshire Royal Infirmary.
President and chief surgeon of the infirmary was Eric Young, and in 1937 funds were needed for the new X-ray unit at the infirmary, which was opened by the Duke of Kent.
Young was ambidextrous, which was very useful in a surgeon. He was ambidextrous, and I wouldn't describe him as a courageous surgeon, but he was a very neat and he had a very meticulous technique. He was a beautiful dissector. Oh, I was his assistant surgeon for probably 4 or 5 years, from 1930.
Eric Young lived at Stoneyfields, now the site of the new Victoria Theatre.
It was really a magnificent house and beautifully furnished and luxuriously furnished, in fact. And there were 11 acres of ground at that time.
There was only the one drive up. And then had these landscape gardeners. And as I say, that lawn was cut so the drive went right round and out again, instead of turning round at the front door. And then those beds were made on the middle of the lawn, as it was, what was left. But then there was a little gate went from there through to where the loggia was, and that lawn there and the beds. And then got the house, then there was a rockery, and the lily pond, and then going round a sunken rose garden, and there's a more garden there that got a rose pergola on it just to cut it off a bit, but there was nothing much grown there besides a few flowers now and again. Well, as a matter of fact, there was one patch there that we used to have a lot of big dahlias on. But then through the gate, you come to Crazy Paving Walk, and then a rose bed right the way down, with an opening in the middle for the tennis court gates.
I remember playing tennis there. I think Mr. Young had got 2 beautiful hard courts, and on Saturday afternoons and sometimes on Sunday they were well filled with his guests.
These Wednesdays and Saturdays when I went to play tennis, I looked forward to them, partly because we used to have a lovely tea, and the gardens were so enormously exciting. We'd be there for 3 and we'd come away at about 6 to past. And as I said, there was always this superb tea which you all looked forward to.
Sometimes I saw them and sometimes I didn't. I used to keep out of the road as much as possible. I'd get, when we'd got ready for the party, the tennis court and that, because there was only the preparation of the courts. When they got rid of those, and we know that party was coming, as soon as they started coming around into the kitchen garden out of sight.
Elsie Young, like groups of people that she knew, and of course they were mostly medical people, but she was very friendly with Helen Griffiths, who was Joe Griffiths, the town clerk's wife, and of course he was my husband's cousin. And I went there, and the McLeans were there. And so I got to know a lot of medical people in that way. But that's why I can't place them. They were really on the fringe of the life I was leading. I led a very different type of life.
Mr. Young did a tremendous amount of entertaining. We were at several occasions there, and I was present, of course, at that silver wedding anniversary party, which was a terrific do, really. Mrs. Young she had the reputation of being one of the finest cooks, and certainly in North Staffordshire, if not in the country. And some of her distinguished guests, such as Sir Harold Gillis and Archie McIndoe, they told me once that on one occasion that they never had food in any part of the world to surpass Elsie Young's meals.
Almost just a little piece of life, completely cut off from everyday life that went on, you know, getting the children off to school and going down to see the district nurse and all the things that you did as part of life in those days.
Gentleman. It's the only word you can say for him. And I've heard that from a good many of his old patients, that he was a gentleman. Because the patients used to come up there at one time. Well, after they'd been in hospital, come for checkup and that, you'd see them up there. I've heard many of them say he was a gentleman.
I say Mr. Young used Stoneyfields, in addition to his residence, as a consultation suite. So that he carried on his surgical practice from Stoneyfields. And a very imposing one it must have been when patients came up the drive.